Fairview was the kind of place people described as quiet with almost a touch of pride. Tucked between rolling hills and wide, open farmland, the town was known more for its Saturday farmers markets and high school football games than for anything that might appear in the headlines. People left their front doors unlocked, cars idled with keys in the ignition, while their owners ducked into the diner, and neighbors waved across white picket fences. For decades, the rhythm of Fairview had been steady, unchanging, and reassuring. It was not the sort of town that bred whispers of fear until the break-ins began. The first incident seemed unusual, but not catastrophic. One chilly night in early autumn, a family on the edge of town returned home to find their back door forced open. The intruder had taken little more than some electronics and a jewelry box. The local sheriff's department filed the report and assured the family it was likely an isolated event. After all, crime in Fairview was rare, and the idea of a repeat offense felt far-fetched. The townsfolk shrugged it off, muttering that every town, no matter how safe, had its occasional brush with trouble. But then the second break-in came, and the third. By the time the fifth incident had been reported, the people of Fairview realized they were facing something different. These were not random acts of mischief by passing strangers. The crimes carried a disturbing pattern. The intruder entered at night, moved with eerie precision, and always avoided being seen. The items stolen seemed deliberately chosen not just valuables, but sometimes small, personal objects that hinted at something more unsettling than greed. Jewelry, cash, and electronics vanished, but so did family photographs, children's trinkets, even a mother's locket with her baby's hair inside. The thefts felt intimate, invasive, and cruel. Fear began to spread like a chill through the town's narrow streets. Parents who once allowed their children to ride bikes at dusk now called them inside before the streetlights flickered on. Porch lights glowed throughout the night, a constellation of worry across Fairview. Hardware stores sold out of locks and security devices, and even those who prided themselves on the town's neighborly trust double-checked their doors before bed. The sheriff's department, small and underfunded, struggled to keep up. They increased patrols, setting up watch posts on the roads leading in and out of town, but the break-ins continued. Each time, the intruder slipped through their net like smoke, leaving behind only the fragments of violated homes and shaken families. Deputies worked overtime, interviewing witnesses, dusting for fingerprints, chasing rumors, but each lead ended in frustration. Whoever was behind the crimes seemed to know Fairview too well, as if he had walked its streets for years, memorizing its shadows and secrets. In diners and barbershops, whispers grew louder. It must be someone from here, people said over steaming mugs of coffee. Who else would know where to go, what to take, how to avoid being caught? Suspicions bloomed, sometimes cruelly, casting shadows over long-trusted neighbors. A handyman who had once fixed everyone's gutters suddenly found his services declined. Teenagers who loitered near the gas station were eyed with suspicion. The bonds that had held the town together for decades began to fray, strained by the gnawing uncertainty that the culprit might be one of their own. What unsettled people most wasn't just the thefts, it was the silence of the intruder. He left no calling card, no spray-painted signature, no messages scrawled on walls. There was no evidence of rage, no wild destruction, only quiet precision. It was as if someone slipped into homes with a ghost's patience, touched lives in the smallest, most intimate ways, and vanished again without a sound. Families reported waking to discover missing possessions, though they swore they had heard nothing in the night. Children, especially, became restless sleepers, whispering of shadows in hallways or footsteps at their windows. One child, however, had seen more than just a shadow. On a cool November night, 8-year-old Emily sat up late in her bedroom, too excited to sleep after a birthday party. Clutching her new stuffed bear, She peered out the window and saw movement across the yard. At first, she thought it was her father returning from work, but as the figure drew closer, she realized it was someone else. The man moved quickly, with a strange, deliberate calm. She didn't scream. Something about the figure made her freeze, watching silently as he slipped toward the neighbor's home. She told no one right away, too frightened to put words to what she had seen. The next morning, when news spread that the neighbor's house had been broken into, Emily's silence weighed heavily on her. She finally whispered what she had seen to her mother, who brought the information to the police. But Emily's account was fragmented. She remembered only small details: the way the man's shoulders hunched, the sound of his shoes on the gravel, and something about the way he muttered under his breath. To the sheriff's department, it wasn't enough to act upon. Still, they marked her as a witness, someone who might have noticed more than even she realized. As the weeks went on, the sense of unease only deepened. Fairview, once a place where children played freely in open fields, now felt like a town under siege. Strangers were met with guarded stares, and familiar faces no longer carried the same trust. Even church on Sundays, once filled with warmth and chatter, became quieter, the congregation exchanging uneasy glances as if searching for guilt among their own. The local newspaper ran story after story, its front pages dominated by speculation. Who is behind the Fairview break-ins? Headlines grew bolder, demanding answers. Yet with every promise of progress, the sheriff's office admitted they were still missing something critical, some detail that tied it all together. Behind the scenes, however, authorities had begun to focus on Emily. The little girl's memory, though incomplete, held a spark of truth they could not ignore. When she described the intruder's muttering, investigators considered whether she had overheard words that might be a clue. But Emily, shy and nervous, could not bring herself to repeat them aloud in front of strangers. Her parents urged patience, hoping she would open up in time. Fairview waited, too restless, anxious, desperate. It was in this tense climate that the sheriff's department finally prepared to bring the case into court. They believed they had identified a suspect, a man with a history of petty theft, who had been seen near the neighborhoods at odd hours. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was enough to justify a trial. The town buzzed with anticipation. Maybe, finally, they would have answers. Maybe the long nights of fear could end. Yet no one, not even the most seasoned deputy, anticipated that the key moment of the trial would come not from hard evidence or police testimony, but from the quiet voice of a child and two whispered words spoken not to the jury, but to a police dog. Fairview, shaken to its core by months of uncertainty, was about to witness a courtroom scene so extraordinary that it would echo in the town's memory for years to come. The courthouse in Fairview was an old building, its red brick walls standing as a reminder of another era. It had seen its fair share of disputes over land, family quarrels, and the occasional theft, but never had it hosted a trial that captured the town's attention like this one. On the morning of the proceedings, the steps were lined with reporters from regional newspapers and a few television crews from nearby cities. Residents, too, gathered outside, speaking in hushed tones, waiting for their chance to enter the gallery. Everyone in Fairview wanted to see how the case would unfold. Inside, the air was charged with anticipation. The jurors filed in, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and unease. The defendant sat stiffly at the defense table, avoiding eye contact with the gallery, his lawyer whispering in his ear. A prosecutor organized her notes at the opposite table, her posture rigid with determination. At the front of the room, Judge Harold Whitaker, a man known for his stern but fair demeanor, surveyed the courtroom with practiced calm. Yet even he knew this trial was different. The town's fears, its unrest, its fraying trust, all of it seemed to rest within these walls. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The doors at the side of the courtroom opened, and a small figure entered, her hand clasped tightly in her mother's. Emily looked far younger than her 8 years. Her light hair fell across her face. Her shoes tapped nervously against the polished floor, and her other arm clutched a warm teddy bear to her chest. The room, filled with tension moments earlier, softened slightly as eyes followed her small steps. A hush fell over the crowd. For many, it was startling to realize that a fragile child before them was the key witness. She had been the only one to glimpse the intruder clearly enough to provide details, the only one who might hold the thread that tied everything together. But Emily did not look like a witness. She looked like a little girl who wanted nothing more than to disappear into her mother's side and be far away from all the watchful eyes. The judge cleared his throat, his voice steady but not unkind. "Young lady, you may come forward." Emily's mother squeezed her hand, guiding her toward the witness stand. The bailiff, towering and broad-shouldered, bent down slightly to offer a reassuring smile as he held the gate open. Emily climbed into the tall chair with effort, her feet dangling far above the ground. She placed her teddy bear on her lap, hugging it close as though it could shield her from the room's attention. Judge Whitaker noticed her unease immediately. He was not a man prone to sentimentality, yet even he recognized the extraordinary weight being placed on such young shoulders. He leaned forward, speaking not as a judge, but as someone who wanted to make her feel safe. "You may have something with you for comfort," he said gently. "And you'll notice Officer Rex is here with us today." At that cue, the side door opened again, and a German shepherd entered with his handler. Rex padded across the room with a quiet confidence that drew everyone's eyes. His coat gleamed under the lights, his steps steady and assured. He was a working dog, a trained K-9 officer who had assisted in dozens of operations. Yet here, his role was different. Today, Rex was more than law enforcement. He was a source of comfort, a silent guardian for a frightened child. Emily's face lit up when she saw him. She had met Rex before, during the initial witness interviews, when deputies noticed her fear and thought the dog might calm her. It worked instantly then, and now, as Rex settled at her feet, she reached down to stroke his head, her breathing easing. A gallery watched, some smiling faintly at the tender scene, others marveling at the unusual sight of a dog in the courtroom. Few understood that this simple accommodation would soon change the entire trial. The prosecutor, a sharp-minded woman named Linda Carr, adjusted her glasses and approached slowly. She knew the challenge ahead, to guide a terrified child through testimony without overwhelming her. "Hello, Emily," she said softly, crouching so she wasn't towering over the little girl. "Do you remember me?" Emily nodded faintly, her hand never leaving Rex's fur. "You're very brave to be here," Linda continued. "I know this is scary, but all we want is to understand what you saw. And if at any point you want to stop, you just let us know, all right?" The girl gave another small nod. Her teddy bear sat wedged between her arm and the witness stand railing, as though it too were listening. Linda began with simple questions: her name, her age, her favorite subject in school. Emily's answers were whispered, but clear enough for the court reporter to record. The jury leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the gentle exchange. For a moment, it seemed as though things might proceed smoothly. But when the questions shifted to that November night, everything changed. "Emily," Linda asked softly, "do you remember the night when something happened near your neighbor's house?" The girl's body tensed. Her hand tightened on Rex's collar, her eyes lowering to the floor. Silence stretched across the courtroom. Judge Whitaker cleared his throat, ready to intervene if necessary, but he held back, giving the child space. "It's okay," Linda coaxed gently. Just tell us what you remember. Did you see someone? Emily's lips parted as though she might speak, but then she froze. Her eyes darted toward the defense table, where the defendant sat staring at her with a flat, unreadable expression. Her breath quickened, and she shook her head, retreating into silence. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge rapped his gavel once for order, though his gaze lingered on the little girl with concern. It was then that Emily leaned toward Rex. She pressed her face close to his ear, her small lips moving. The courtroom strained to hear, but no words carried beyond the dog's fur. The whisper lasted only seconds, and then she sat back, her eyes wide, her hand still resting on Rex's head. At first, it seemed like nothing had happened, but Rex's reaction was immediate and startling. His ears snapped upright, his body stiffened, and his eyes locked unerringly on the defendant. A low rumble vibrated in his chest, the faintest growl, barely audible but filled with unmistakable intensity. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The handler, caught off guard, tugged gently at Rex's lead, trying to calm him. But the dog's instincts had been triggered. He had recognized the words he had been trained to respond to during countless hours of police work. The room shifted from quiet tension to electric unease. The jurors exchanged startled glances. Reporters scribbled furiously. The prosecutor's eyebrows shot upward, and even the defense attorney seemed unsettled by the sudden turn. Judge Whitaker's gavel struck the block again. Order, he commanded, though his own face betrayed a flicker of surprise. No one knew yet what the girl had whispered. But one thing was certain. The trial had just taken a dramatic and unexpected turn. And Emily, the timid little girl clutching her teddy bear, had become the center of it all. The appearance of Rex in the courtroom was unlike anything most residents of Fairview had ever witnessed. Dogs were common companions in their town farm shepherds, loyal retrievers, even the occasional hound sprawled lazily on porches. But this was different. Rex was no family pet. He was a police canine officer, highly trained, deeply disciplined, and with instincts honed for one purpose: to protect and serve. Yet here he was, lying calmly at the feet of a trembling child, offering something far beyond law enforcement. To Emily, he was not a tool of the justice system, but a friend, a guardian, and a silent promise of safety. Rex had been part of the Fairview County Sheriff's Department for nearly 4 years. Handpicked from a specialized breeding program, he had undergone rigorous training in detection, obedience, and criminal apprehension. His handler, Officer James Dalton, often remarked that Rex was the smartest partner he had ever worked with, one who never complained, never hesitated, and never faltered under pressure. The bond between them was unshakable, built through countless hours of drills, patrols, and shared experiences on the job. In court, Rex's presence was more symbolic than tactical. Officially, he was there to ease Emily's anxiety, part of a growing practice in which therapy animals or canine officers were permitted to accompany vulnerable witnesses. Judge Whitaker, usually cautious about deviations from courtroom protocol, had approved the request reluctantly at first. But after observing Emily's fear during preliminary interviews, he conceded it might be necessary. If this helps the child speak, he had said, then it helps justice. No one could deny that Rex had an effect. The moment Emily touched him, her trembling eased, and her voice, though still faint, grew steadier. The courtroom, tense with expectation, softened around the edges when the dog settled at her side. It was a striking sight, the innocence of a child beside the imposing strength of a working dog. And in that juxtaposition, the jury, the spectators, and even the press found something profoundly moving. Yet beneath the calm exterior, Rex was alert. His training never allowed complete relaxation in such settings. Every shift of movement in the room, every rustle of paper, Every nervous cough was catalogued by his sharp senses. His eyes flicked from jurors to attorneys to the defendant, and back again. His ears twitched at the faintest sound. Though outwardly still, he was a coiled spring of awareness, ready to act if danger arose. For Emily, this vigilance translated into comfort. She didn't have to look at the defendant, didn't have to focus on the sea of strangers staring at her. She had Rex. His presence grounded her in a way no adult's reassurances could. She leaned toward him when the questions became difficult, brushing her small fingers through his fur, and he remained steady, unflinching, as if promising her silently, "You are not alone." To the jury, this bond was not lost. Several jurors later admitted that watching Emily with Rex stirred something in them, an empathy, a reminder of their own children or grandchildren. It humanized the trial, cutting through the cold formality of legal procedure. But more than that, it underscored the gravity of the situation. If a child this young, this frightened, was the centerpiece of the case, then something terrible had truly unsettled the town. The defense, however, was less pleased. The attorney objected quietly before proceedings, arguing that the presence of a police dog might prejudice the jury, suggesting intimidation or a link between the defendant and danger. Judge Whitaker dismissed the objection. "This animal is not here to testify," he stated firmly. "He is here to provide comfort, nothing more." Still, the attorney cast wary glances at Rex throughout the trial, aware that the dog's very existence carried an unspoken weight in the minds of those watching. As the questioning of Emily progressed, everyone noticed how Rex responded to her unspoken cues. When her voice wavered, he nudged his head closer to her hand. When she froze, he shifted subtly, drawing her attention back to him. When she whispered, he listened not as a human might, parsing meaning, but as a creature attuned to sound, tone, and instinct. And when those two whispered words came, his reaction was instantaneous and undeniable. The handler, Officer Dalton, had seen Rex react like that only in training exercises or active duty situations. The dog's posture was unmistakable, alert, focused, and ready to respond to a recognized trigger. In all his years of working with Rex, Dalton had never seen him mistake a command or react without cause. If Rex stiffened, if his eyes locked onto the defendant, if that low growl rumbled from his throat, it meant something. It meant Emily's words had power, words that resonated with his training and experience. The courtroom didn't know what to make of it. Was it coincidence? Was it theatrics? Or had the child truly whispered something that struck at the heart of the case? The jurors whispered among themselves during recess. Reporters scribbled frantic notes, and townspeople, watching from the gallery, exchanged glances heavy with speculation. For months, Fairview had been haunted by shadows and silence, desperate for a breakthrough. And now, in the most unexpected of ways, that breakthrough seemed to have come, not through evidence or cross-examination, but through the bond between a child and a dog. Rex remained steady through it all. He was not aware of the weight his actions carried, not conscious of the fact that his reaction might sway the course of a trial. He was simply doing what he had been trained to do: respond to certain triggers, protect those in his care, and remain vigilant in uncertain situations. Yet to those in the courtroom, his behavior was more than instinct. It was a revelation. For Emily, Rex became more than a companion in that moment. He was her voice when hers failed, her courage when fear silenced her. And in the eyes of the town, he was the unusual companion whose presence turned a fragile child's whisper into something undeniable. When court adjourned that day, the gallery emptied into the crisp afternoon air, buzzing with speculation. "Did you see the way that dog reacted?" One man muttered to his neighbor. She whispered, and then he, like he knew exactly what she said. Across the courthouse steps, reporters debated how to phrase the scene for tomorrow's headlines without violating the judge's gag order. "The child and the dog," one murmured, shaking his head. "No one's going to believe it unless they were here to see it." And in the shadows of the crowd, townspeople whispered to one another, their fear tempered by a flicker of hope. Perhaps finally, the truth was coming into focus. Perhaps justice was no longer out of reach. Inside the courthouse, Rex was led. Back to his handler's vehicle, tail swishing, ears still alert. He looked back once toward the building, as though sensing the weight of what had transpired. Emily, clutching her teddy bear, watched him from the doorway, her small face breaking into the faintest smile. For the first time in months, she felt a little less afraid. The unusual companion had done more than comfort her. He had changed everything. The courtroom was already a tense stage that morning, but when Emily leaned down toward Rex, the air seemed to hold its breath. A room full of adults, jurors, lawyers, reporters. Townsfolk watched as a small girl pressed her lips to the pointed ear of a German shepherd. No one could hear the words she spoke. The microphones didn't catch them. The court reporters' keys stayed still, and the people craned their necks in vain. For a heartbeat, it was nothing more than a child whispering to a dog. But then, everything changed. Rex's ears snapped upright. His eyes sharpened like a blade's edge, focusing on the defendant as though every molecule of his being had been trained to do so. His body stiffened, his weight shifting forward, alert and coiled with purpose. Then came the sound, a low, steady growl that rolled like distant thunder beneath the courtroom's quiet. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Every person in the room felt it, that primal vibration that only a dog can create when warning of danger. The effect was immediate. Jurors jerked in their seats. Reporters paused mid-sentence in their notebooks. The gallery gasped collectively, a ripple of shock that echoed off the courtroom's high ceilings. The defendant froze, his face stiffening for the briefest of moments before he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His attorney reached out, placing a steadying hand on his arm, but the man's expression betrayed a flicker of unease he could not completely hide. The handler, Officer Dalton, was on his feet in an instant, tugging Rex's lead firmly. "Easy, boy. Easy," he whispered, his voice low but firm. He knew what this posture meant. He had seen Rex respond like this in the field, during training drills, in real investigations. Dogs didn't growl for nothing. Rex was reacting to something he recognized in the two words Emily had whispered. The judge, taken aback, but unwilling to lose control of the room, banged his gavel. "Order. I will have order," he thundered. Yet even Judge Whitaker's voice carried an edge of uncertainty. He had watched the girl shrink against the dog moments earlier, too frightened to speak, only to lean close and share a secret meant for no one else. And then, just like that, the dog had become her voice, her shield, her messenger. The prosecutor, Linda Carr, straightened, eyes wide. She hadn't heard the words, but she recognized Rex's training. She knew enough about K-9 units to understand that their reactions were never random. She exchanged a look with Dalton, who gave the faintest of nods, confirming her suspicions. Emily had whispered something Rex had been trained to detect, a phrase or a trigger tied directly to law enforcement work. The defense attorney, however, was quick to his feet. Objection. He barked, his voice louder than necessary, fueled by the panic coursing through him. This is absurd. The testimony of a dog cannot be admissible, and the court cannot permit this kind of spectacle to prejudice the jury against my client. His words rang out, but the room was still rattled by Rex's growl, by the child's whisper, by the eerie feeling that something real and raw had just surfaced in front of them. The judge rapped his gavel again, but softer this time, as though to calm the storm instead of fight it. "Enough," he said, his voice dropping. He turned his gaze to Emily, who sat frozen, clutching Rex's fur with tiny white-knuckled hands. The teddy bear had slipped from her lap to the floor, forgotten. Her eyes darted toward the defendant, then back to the dog, as if her courage was bound entirely in Rex's steady presence. "Miss Emily," the judge said gently, his stern tone softened for her ears. "You don't have to speak to anyone you don't want to. But can you tell me, did you say something important to Rex just now?" The little girl hesitated. The silence in the courtroom stretched long, unbearable. Then she gave the faintest nod, almost imperceptible, and buried her face against Rex's neck. The judge leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He knew the jury was restless, that the press was hungry, that the defense would fight this, tooth and nail. But he also knew that something extraordinary had just unfolded. He turned to the attorneys. "We will recess," he declared. "Counsel, approach." As murmurs rose in the gallery, the jury was ushered out. The press ordered to stay seated. Emily was gently led from the stand into chambers, accompanied by her mother, Officer Dalton, and Rex. Only there, in the relative privacy of the judge's office, would the whispered words be revealed. Back in the emptying courtroom, the spectators buzzed with speculation. What could the girl have said? Why did the dog react with such certainty? Was it a code word, a command, or something darker? Theories flew from row to row, each more dramatic than the last. In chambers, the atmosphere was entirely different. Judge Whittaker removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose as Emily perched timidly in a chair. Rex planted loyally at her feet. Dalton rested a reassuring hand on his partner's back, while Linda Carr crouched beside the child, her voice patient and kind. "Emily," she said, "you don't have to say it loud if you don't want to. But can you tell us again what you whispered to Rex?" The girl's lips trembled. She looked down at her teddy bear, retrieved from the floor and clutched tight once more. Finally, in a voice barely above a breath, she spoke the two words. Dalton stiffened. Linda's eyes widened. And Judge Whittaker, a man not easily rattled after decades on the bench, felt his stomach tighten. The words were not random. They were not innocent. They were chillingly precise. They were words tied directly to the suspect, words no child could have invented, words no one outside law enforcement should even know. They described something the intruder had said during one of the break-ins, a phrase investigators had kept hidden from the public to test the validity of witnesses. And yet here it was, spoken by an 8-year-old girl to a dog, and confirmed by the dog's unmistakable reaction. Whittaker leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his mouth. He knew instantly what this meant. The girl's testimony was genuine, undeniable, and damning. But he also knew the danger of exposing it too openly. If word of this leaked, Emily's safety would be in jeopardy. The defendant had friends, family, people who might retaliate against a child whose whisper could put him behind bars for years. He turned to the others in the room, his voice grave. This testimony is sealed. No one repeats what was said here, not to the jury, not to the press, not to anyone. The girl's safety depends on it. Linda opened her mouth to protest. She wanted to use the words in open court, but the judge's glare silenced her. "I will not risk this child's life," he said firmly. "We will find another way to present the evidence. But her words stay between us." Emily, unaware of the weight of the decision, leaned back against Rex, her eyes finally softening as though she had unburdened herself of a terrible secret. The dog licked her hand once, a small gesture of reassurance, as though to tell her she had done enough. When court reconvened later that afternoon, the jury returned to their seats, the gallery buzzing with unanswered questions. But nothing more was said about the whisper. The judge's face was set in stone, and the attorneys pressed forward with other evidence. Still, the moment lingered. Everyone in the room remembered the way the dog had reacted, the way the child had whispered, the way the defendant had shifted uncomfortably in his chair. They didn't know the words, but they knew their power. And for the town of Fairview, that single whisper became something more than testimony. It became legend. The courtroom, which had moments earlier been filled with the polite murmurs of anticipation, now held a charged, almost electric silence. Rex, the German shepherd, remained fixed on the defendant, every muscle taut, his eyes blazing with unwavering focus. To the casual observer, it might have seemed excessive a dog responding to a child's whisper, but Officer Dalton knew exactly what it meant. Rex was trained for situations like this. His reaction was not a coincidence. It was instinct, memory, and discipline combined, and it told the story of danger and truth in a language the humans could not yet hear. Dalton tugged lightly on Rex's lead, a gesture meant to calm him, but the dog did not break focus. He shifted his weight forward, growled low in his chest, a sound that resonated through the courtroom without overwhelming it. The jurors, who had been leaning forward with curiosity, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some clutched their notebooks, others pressed hands against their mouths, all feeling the tension that rippled from a child's whisper into a powerful canine instinct. The defendant's face betrayed his unease, subtle but undeniable. Beads of sweat formed at his hairline. His lawyer leaned close, murmuring something in a low, rapid tone, trying to reassure him. But the man's body language was all the court needed to read. Fear, hesitation, guilt. He shifted in his chair, eyes darting to the jury, and then to the judge, searching for some semblance of control he no longer possessed. Judge Whitaker, for his part, maintained a calm exterior, though internally he was weighing the unprecedented situation. A K-9 officer responding so sharply to a child's words in open court was something he had never witnessed. His gavel rested in his hand, unused but ready, as he observed the subtle interplay of human and animal instinct. He could see the ripple effect. Jurors, attorneys, spectators, all now part of a tension that transcended ordinary courtroom procedure. Rex's growl was deliberate, but measured. Dalton whispered under his breath, steadying the dog, guiding his body to stay balanced. Rex did not act aggressively. He did not lunge or bark. But his posture, rigid and precise, conveyed a message every human could feel. Something was wrong, and someone in the room was responsible. It was a communication older than language, a warning older than law, a signal that instincts could read and humans could interpret if they were perceptive enough. The jurors glanced at one another, an unspoken question passing among them. They had been prepared for testimony, for documents, for evidence laid out in orderly fashion. They had not been prepared for this. The trial had already challenged the community, but this, the interplay of child, dog, and defendant, pushed it into uncharted territory. Every eye was drawn to Rex, and through him, to Emily, the child who had whispered the words that triggered this extraordinary reaction. Emily sat frozen, tiny hands gripping the edges of the witness stand, knuckles white. Her teddy bear lay on the floor, forgotten, as she focused solely on Rex. To her, the dog was more than a protector. He was her voice. She had communicated the truth, the piece of the puzzle she had observed months earlier. And now Rex was carrying that message to the courtroom in a language only instinct could speak. The defense attorney rose abruptly, face pale but voice steady, attempting to reclaim control of the situation. "Your Honor," he said, "I must object to the apparent influence this dog is having on the jury. This is not proper evidence. The defendant cannot be prejudiced by an animal's behavior, nor by a child's intimate communication with that animal. Judge Whitaker did not respond immediately. He allowed a tense silence to fill the room, permitting everyone to feel the weight of the moment. Then, in a measured tone, he said, "I am aware of the objection, counsel. However, this courtroom is witnessing an extraordinary circumstance. The dog is not providing evidence. The child is not yet providing testimony that is being entered into record. What is occurring is a reaction, a response, and it must be observed. No judgment is being made at this moment. Let us proceed with caution." Dalton tightened his grip slightly on Rex's lead, guiding him gently, but allowing him to remain alert. He had worked with this dog for years, and he understood that. Its instincts were more precise than any human's reasoning in many cases. Rex had identified danger before humans had recognized it, had apprehended suspects before they could escape, and had never once been wrong in a situation like this. Every twitch of his ears, every shift in his stance, told Dalton that Emily's words had resonated with him on a level humans might never fully comprehend. The prosecutor, Linda Carr, leaned forward slightly, taking careful notes. She understood the implication. While the words themselves had not been recorded for the courtroom, the response they triggered was tangible. It was observable. It demonstrated that Emily's testimony, even in whispered form, was meaningful. It demonstrated that she had seen and understood something critical. And it demonstrated that justice had found an unlikely ally in Rex, whose instincts bridged the gap between fear and truth. Outside the courtroom, in the gallery, spectators whispered among themselves. Conversations were hushed, almost reverential. Parents of other children, teachers, and neighbors alike felt the weight of what they were witnessing. They did not hear the whispered words, but they saw their impact. The idea that a small child and a dog together could influence the proceedings in such a profound way was astonishing. Even seasoned reporters, used to the sensational and the bizarre, were momentarily stunned into silence. Back in the courtroom, Rex remained poised. The growl subsided slightly, replaced by a focused stare, unwavering and penetrating. Dalton could feel the energy in the room shifting. The defendant's confidence, already fragile, was cracking under the invisible pressure of the canine's awareness. Even subtle gestures and intake of breath, a tightening of fists, were noted by Dalton and Linda. This dog had never been wrong in such matters. And now, he had confirmed that Emily's observation was real, that the suspect could not feign innocence. Judge Whitaker, recognizing the delicacy of the moment, called a brief recess. The jury was escorted from the room, and the gallery was asked to remain seated. The courtroom emptied of its most immediate observers, leaving only the essential personnel: the judge, the attorneys, the handler, Emily, and Rex. Even in this smaller group, the tension was palpable. Dalton knelt beside Rex, murmuring, "Easy, buddy, easy, stay with her, stay calm." The dog leaned slightly into Emily, who wrapped her arms around his neck. She drew strength from him, and he drew focus from her. It was a bond that transcended words. It was a silent understanding, a partnership built on trust, loyalty, and instinct. In the quiet that followed, the courtroom staff exchanged looks of disbelief. A child's whisper had caused a trained canine to react with precision and purpose, revealing an unseen truth. The implications were clear. Emily had spoken words of consequence. Rex had responded accordingly. And the entire trial, already fraught with tension, had shifted in ways no one could have predicted. The defendant sat slouched in his chair, jaw tight, his lawyer whispering incessantly in his ear. Every subtle movement from Rex kept him on edge. The growl, the stare, the coiled readiness. It was a language of warning, and he understood it. Whether he admitted it or not, he was aware that the child and her unusual companion had just changed everything. When court reconvened, The atmosphere remained charged. Jurors returned to their seats with whispers of awe and speculation. The gallery remained quiet, each person aware that something extraordinary had transpired. And in the center of it all, Emily and Rex maintained their bond, the silent thread connecting innocence, instinct, and truth. The courtroom had witnessed the remarkable power of the unusual companion. Justice, in that moment, had an unlikely messenger. The courtroom had never been so still. The murmurs that had accompanied Emily's earlier testimony had faded into a heavy silence, the kind that made the air itself seem dense. Every person present sensed that something extraordinary had just occurred, though none fully understood it. Jurors exchanged glances, some wide-eyed with disbelief, others trying to maintain composure, aware that the smallest gesture could be read as acknowledgement. Reporters, pens hovering over paper, froze mid-sentence, unable to capture the moment. Even the judge, a man with decades of experience presiding over trials, felt an unusual tension twist in his chest. Emily sat on the witness stand, clutching Rex's fur tightly, her eyes wide and uncertain. The child had done something remarkable, something that transcended normal court procedures. She had whispered 2 words to a police dog, and the dog's reaction had confirmed her observation, in a way that no human testimony could. The defendant, seated at the defense table, had visibly stiffened, his earlier composure faltering as he recognized the implications of what had just occurred. He shifted in his chair, casting anxious glances at the judge, the jury, and Rex. Judge Whitaker cleared his throat, his gavel poised, but unused for the moment. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him more than usual. This was not a simple case of theft or minor assault. The child's testimony had entered a domain. The law rarely touched a combination of instinct, animal behavior, and the perception of a vulnerable witness. The judge understood that the courtroom's response could influence the proceedings dramatically, and he needed to ensure fairness for all parties involved. "Counsel," the judge began, his voice measured but firm, "we have witnessed extraordinary circumstances. The reactions of the witness and the K-9 officer are significant. However, I am acutely aware that the nature of this testimony, if repeated in public or media accounts, could place the child in grave danger." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Therefore, I am ordering that the specific words spoken by the witness to the police dog remain sealed. No public discussion, no reporting, no repeated testimony outside these chambers. This order is effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the gallery, but the judge's stare silenced it instantly. Emily's mother exhaled shakily, grateful that the court recognized the risk to her child. The defendant's attorney looked incredulous, rising to object. "Your Honor," he said, voice edged with frustration, "this is unprecedented. We are being asked to proceed without full disclosure. How can the jury weigh the evidence if critical testimony is being withheld?" Judge Whitaker's gaze did not waver. The protection of a vulnerable witness supersedes procedural concerns in this instance. The sealed testimony will be made available to the court under strict confidentiality, and we will find alternative ways to present corroborating evidence to the jury. The court is satisfied that this approach preserves both the child's safety and the integrity of the trial. The defense attorney sank back into his chair, visibly frustrated, yet aware he had little choice. The legal system had recognized a rare intersection of human and animal perception, and any attempt to challenge it openly risked further scrutiny or public backlash. Meanwhile, Emily's quiet presence at the stand remained unshaken. She did not fully understand the implications of the judge's decision, only that she had done something important, and Rex remained her anchor. The jurors returned to their seats, but the room was tense, charged with the unspoken knowledge of what had transpired. While the specific words remained secret, their effect was undeniable. Observers could see it in Rex's stance, in the defendant's discomfort, and in the reactions of Emily and her mother. The trial had shifted dramatically, from a straightforward burglary case to a story of subtle but undeniable proof that would shape the course of justice. Outside the courtroom, reporters struggled to piece together the events without violating the judge's gag order. They spoke in hushed tones, speculating wildly. "Did you see the way the dog reacted?" One whispered to a colleague. "I swear it was like he knew the truth before anyone else in that room." Another nodded, scribbling in a notebook. Unbelievable. A child's whisper, a police dog, and the suspect practically crumbling. Yet none could report the specific words, and that lack of clarity only intensified the story's mystique. Inside the court, the prosecutor, Linda Carr, approached the bench after the recess. She understood the significance of what had just occurred. Emily's words, though sealed, provided a critical pivot in the investigation. "Your Honor?" she said quietly. "The child's testimony, though whispered, has already redirected our investigative strategy. With the proper measures, we can use this without compromising her safety." Judge Whitaker nodded. "I am aware, Miss Carr. We will proceed carefully. I am entrusting the handling of this information to those whose responsibility it is to ensure that no one outside this room can misuse it. The child's well-being is paramount." Dalton, standing beside Rex, observed quietly. He had been trained for the unusual, but even he recognized the rarity of this situation. A dog responding instinctively to a child's whispered words. Influencing a courtroom was almost beyond comprehension. Yet he had witnessed it firsthand, and he knew its accuracy. Rex's training and instincts were precise, and his reaction had verified Emily's observation in a manner that human testimony alone could not achieve. The defendant sat rigid, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Even without knowing the exact words, he understood their impact. The subtle indications, the dog's growl, his unwavering stare communicated to him that Emily had seen something critical, something that linked him unmistakably to the crimes under investigation. His confidence, which had carried him through earlier proceedings, faltered as he realized that the evidence of his guilt had emerged in an extraordinary, undeniable form. The jury, while not privy to the whispered words, sensed the shift. The unusual interplay between Emily and Rex, observed with absolute clarity, conveyed a truth they could interpret without understanding its precise content. Humans have always been sensitive to cues beyond language, tone, posture, and instinct, and in this moment, those cues were amplified through the presence of a highly trained animal reacting to genuine observation. As the day progressed, the court moved forward, with additional testimony, examining circumstantial evidence and past incidents. But the shadow of Emily's whisper loomed over the proceedings, subtle but persistent. Every gesture, every glance, every reaction of the defendant and his attorney was scrutinized more closely than before. The whisper, though unheard by most, had become the invisible fulcrum of the trial. When the session adjourned for the day, the courtroom emptied slowly. Jurors left with quiet conversation. Jurors' notes clutched tightly, absorbing the gravity of what had occurred. Spectators lingered, whispering among themselves, aware that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment where innocence, instinct, and truth intersected in a way that defied ordinary explanation. Emily left the courtroom with her mother and Rex, the little girl's hand resting on the dog's thick fur. She had no concept of how pivotal her small action had been, only that she had helped, and that Rex had been with her. The courthouse staff observed quietly, recognizing that the events of the morning would be talked about in Fairview for years to come, not because of the crimes alone, but because of the remarkable interplay of child, dog, and justice. In the days that followed, the town's residents debated what they had seen. Conversations in diners, grocery stores, and schoolyards were dominated by speculation. No one knew the whispered words, yet everyone sensed their power. Parents discussed the courage of the child. Officers lauded the instincts of Rex, and the town collectively marveled at the extraordinary alignment of events that had altered the course of a seemingly straightforward trial. Within the courtroom, Judge Whitaker's order of silence remained intact. The sealed testimony was stored under strict supervision, accessible only to essential personnel. No leaks, no whispers, no inadvertent disclosures would compromise the safety of the child or the integrity of the trial. Behind the scenes, investigators began to trace new leads, guided by the undeniable confirmation that Emily's observation was accurate. The case was shifting, quietly but decisively, toward resolution. Fairview, a town long accustomed to predictability and calm, had witnessed a legal moment that was extraordinary, unsettling, and inspiring all at once. A child's courage, combined with the instincts of a loyal police dog, had introduced a force neither the community nor the court could ignore. And in that intersection of innocence, instinct, and justice, the future of the case, and perhaps the town itself, had begun to pivot toward clarity. The sealed testimony was a paradox, invisible yet potent, secret yet undeniable. Locked away in the courthouse's secure evidence room, it existed in a space where only the judge, essential investigators, and select legal personnel could access it. Emily's whispered words had not been spoken aloud in front of the jury, nor transcribed for the public record, yet their impact resonated through every aspect of the case. Those few who had been entrusted with the knowledge understood that the child's voice, so faint and delicate, carried a weight that no conventional evidence could match. Judge Whitaker sat in his chambers, reviewing the file marked Sealed Sensitive Witness Testimony. The weight of responsibility pressed on him. Protecting Emily was paramount. Any leak could jeopardize her safety. At the same time, justice demanded that the information be used wisely to bring closure to a case that had unsettled the town for months. He had spent decades on the bench, but never had he faced a scenario where instinct, a child's whisper, and the response of a police dog dictated the direction of a trial. The prosecutor, Linda Carr, visited the chambers next, her demeanor a mixture of awe and urgency. "Your Honor," she began, "the sealed testimony changes everything. We now have confirmation that the suspect's presence at multiple break-ins is undeniable. We can correlate Emily's observations with physical evidence we've collected: footprints, fingerprints, patterns and timing, and build a case that is virtually airtight." Judge Whitaker nodded. "I am aware, Miss Carr, but this must be done without revealing the nature of the child's words. The jury must be presented with evidence they can see and verify, while the hidden testimony serves to guide our investigative strategy." Dalton, Rex's handler, stood nearby. The dog had returned to his normal duties, but remained close to Emily when possible, his presence a quiet reassurance. Dalton understood the extraordinary importance of Rex's reaction. It had confirmed the child's observations in a way that human testimony alone could not. Now, as part of the investigation team, he was helping translate the instincts into actionable leads. Over the next several days, investigators pored over the town's records. They cross-referenced surveillance footage, security logs, and reports of suspicious activity. Every pattern, every anomaly, was scrutinized in light of the sealed testimony. Emily's whisper, though unheard by most, had given them a focal point to trigger, to reevaluate the timeline and behaviors of the suspect. Each piece of evidence they revisited suddenly gained significance, as if her words had illuminated details that had been invisible before. The suspect's routine, once thought mundane, now seemed calculated. He had been observed near multiple neighborhoods at odd hours, always careful to avoid direct contact, always selecting targets in a pattern that suggested prior knowledge. With Emily's input, the investigators identified correlations between items stolen and specific rooms. In the houses, objects that had personal significance to the families. The thief had not merely stolen. He had observed, remembered, and violated trust in the most intimate ways. Meanwhile, Emily remained largely unaware of her pivotal role. She returned to school, played with friends, and sometimes lingered at the edge of conversation, her small hand resting on Rex's head. But the adults around her, bound by legal obligations and ethical responsibility, orchestrated every step of the investigation with extreme caution. Every lead they pursued, every question they asked, was filtered through the prism of protecting the child while bringing the perpetrator to justice. One evening, in the quiet of the sheriff's office, Dalton reviewed the connections between Emily's whisper and the suspect's movements. "It's uncanny," he said to Linda Carr. "The way Rex reacted, it wasn't just instinct." He confirmed a detail no one outside the investigation knew. And now, looking at this timeline, we can see exactly when and where the suspect struck. Emily's words, her whisper, guided us straight to the truth. Linda's expression was a mix of amazement and focus. "We can't let this influence the jury directly," she said. "But we can reconstruct a narrative based on physical evidence, circumstantial observations, and his behavior patterns. The sealed testimony will guide us, even if we don't share it explicitly." Judge Whitaker remained vigilant throughout. He oversaw each investigative step, ensuring that no information leaked and that Emily remained insulated from stress or potential retaliation. Meetings were conducted in private rooms, files were carefully labeled, and security measures were doubled. The town's fascination with the trial was intense, but the inner workings, this delicate orchestration of law, instinct, and secrecy remained invisible to the public eye. Days turned into weeks. Investigators set up controlled surveillance on the suspect, observing his routines and movements. Every pattern matched the predictions inspired by the sealed testimony. Items previously dismissed as unrelated were reevaluated. The connections were undeniable. The suspect had been meticulous, careful, and observant, yet he had overlooked a critical variable: the observation of a child and the confirmation of a trained police dog. One night, under careful coordination, investigators executed a controlled search of the suspect's property. Evidence previously considered circumstantial: small trinkets, stolen electronics, personal items from multiple victims was recovered and documented meticulously. The chain of custody was flawless, ensuring that every item could be presented in court. Throughout the process, Dalton and Rex were present, providing support to Emily when she visited to identify personal belongings. A dog's presence again calmed her fears, though his impact went beyond reassurance. Rex's reactions subtly validated the identification of items, confirming the accuracy of Emily's earlier observations. Back in chambers, Judge Whitaker reviewed the progress reports. Each report emphasized the precision of the operation, the importance of maintaining secrecy, and the pivotal role of the sealed testimony. He understood that the case was nearing a critical juncture. Soon, they would need to present the evidence in court, guiding the jury to an inevitable conclusion without ever revealing the child's words. The legal strategy required meticulous planning, careful phrasing, and a sensitivity to both justice and protection. As the trial reconvened, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Jurors were aware that the case had shifted in focus. The defendant's composure had changed subtly, his prior confidence replaced by tension and anxiety. Spectators whispered quietly, noting the subtle shifts, though none knew the full extent of the guidance provided by Emily's whisper. The court's proceedings continued with traditional evidence, interviews, and cross-examinations, but behind the scenes, every move had been informed by the child's sealed words. Emily, in the courtroom, remained calm yet observant. Rex lay at her feet, ever vigilant, a silent partner in the orchestration of justice. Together, they embodied a quiet force, innocence and instinct intertwined, guiding a community toward closure. Though the witnesses' words remained hidden from the public, their influence was unmistakable, shaping the path of the investigation and ensuring the truth could not be ignored. By the time the trial reached its penultimate phase, the suspects' fate had been effectively sealed. The evidence, corroborated through careful observation, analysis, and insight provided by the sealed testimony, was overwhelming. The community, still unaware of the child's specific contribution, marveled at the precision of law enforcement. And Emily, oblivious to her legendary status, continued to be a quiet hero, her courage immortalized in a secret that only a few would ever know. The town of Fairview, once shaken by fear and uncertainty, now sensed the approaching resolution. Justice, though guided by unconventional forces, was nearing its conclusion. And in the quiet corners of the courthouse, behind locked doors and careful supervision, the sealed testimony remained a testament to the power of innocence, instinct, and extraordinary collaboration. The courthouse was silent, almost reverent, as the trial neared its final day. Weeks of tense proceedings, careful investigations guided by Emily's sealed whisper, and the meticulous orchestration of evidence had brought the town to a point where closure seemed imminent. Every person in the courtroom felt the weight of anticipation. The jurors, the attorneys, the spectators, even the press, who had been barred from reporting certain critical details by the judge's strict order. All eyes were on the child and her dog, though few understood just how pivotal their roles had been. Emily sat on the witness stand, her small fingers lightly gripping the edges of the seat. Rex lay at her feet, a pillar of calm vigilance. The dog's presence, as always, seemed to anchor her courage. The prosecutor, Linda Carr, reviewed her notes quietly, knowing that every question, every carefully planned piece of evidence had been influenced by the child's whispered guidance. Days earlier, the defendant, meanwhile, sat rigidly, shifting uneasily under the collective gaze of the jury, the judge, and the room that had become the stage for an extraordinary unfolding of justice. Judge Whitaker's gavel rapped the bench, restoring order. "We will proceed with closing statements," he announced. His voice was steady, yet carried an unspoken gravity. He understood that this trial had stretched the limits of conventional courtroom procedure, relying on unconventional forces, trust, instinct, and a child's courage. Still, the law required a formal conclusion, and the judge's role was to ensure it unfolded with fairness and clarity. Linda Carr rose first, her voice confident and precise. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case is about more than stolen property or disrupted homes. It is about observing truth, responding to evidence, and understanding responsibility. While some aspects of the evidence cannot be spoken of publicly due to the safety of a young witness, the facts you have seen, the patterns, the recovered items, and the consistency of observations confirm the defendant's actions beyond reasonable doubt." She gestured subtly toward Emily and Rex, though not elaborating. The jury's attention naturally drifted toward the pair, sensing an unspoken force at work. The prosecutor continued, weaving together circumstantial evidence, timelines, and expert testimony. Though she never revealed the whispered words, every piece of the narrative was guided by the sealed testimony. She concluded, emphasizing the alignment of facts with observable behavior, creating a logical chain that left little room for doubt. The defense attorney, rising next, attempted to challenge the narrative. "Members of the jury, I urge you to consider the absence of direct testimony," he said, his voice tight. "We have physical evidence, yes, but we also have a series of assumptions and interpretations. Remember that a child's observation, however courageous, cannot replace concrete facts. You must weigh what is presented before you, not what is implied. His words, though firm, lacked conviction. He glanced repeatedly at the defendant, whose nervous energy was increasingly palpable. A man's previous confidence had eroded, replaced by tension and awareness that the evidence, guided by forces beyond conventional comprehension, was closing in. Even the defense attorney knew that the unusual combination of Emily's insight and Rex's instinct had created a scenario almost impossible to counter. The judge called for a short recess before the jury began deliberations. In that pause, Emily gently patted Rex, who wagged his tail ever so slightly, a quiet reassurance. Dalton, observing the pair, could not hide a small smile. The dog's calm presence had been critical throughout, and now, as the trial neared its conclusion, it was clear that their bond had influenced the outcome in subtle but undeniable ways. Outside the courtroom, whispers among the spectators conveyed awe, speculation, and relief. While the sealed testimony remained confidential, the community sensed that the case was reaching resolution. Parents spoke quietly about the bravery of the child. Law enforcement officers exchanged nods of respect for the precision of the investigation. Even reporters, constrained by the judge's orders, acknowledged the story as extraordinary, a moment when innocence, instinct, and truth intersected in ways few could fully understand. The jury returned after hours of deliberation. Their faces were solemn as they filed back into the courtroom. Judge Whitaker called the room to order. "Have you reached a verdict?" he asked. The foreperson, a middle-aged teacher with an unwavering gaze, stood. "We have, Your Honor," she said clearly. The words that followed were decisive. Guilty on all counts. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The defendant's shoulders slumped. His lawyer's face betrayed disbelief. Emily, sensing the shift in the room, hugged Rex instinctively, feeling the tension release. The dog, ever calm, rested his head on her lap, his presence a silent affirmation of what had just been confirmed. Judge Whitaker addressed the courtroom with measured solemnity. "The jury has spoken, and justice will be carried out in accordance with the law. This outcome reflects the careful consideration of evidence, testimony, and the diligent efforts of law enforcement, legal counsel, and witnesses." Though the public did not know the precise details of Emily's whisper, its influence had guided the investigation, ensuring that truth and accountability prevailed. The child, quiet and unassuming, had become an unseen force, a pivot point, on which justice balanced. Rex, her steadfast companion, had been more than a dog. He had been a bridge between fear and courage, between observation and certainty. In the days following the verdict, the town of Fairview began to breathe easier. Families who had feared break-ins or unobserved threats felt relief. Law enforcement officers, reflecting on the investigation, acknowledged the unique circumstances that had led to a successful resolution. Emily returned to her normal life, still small and shy, but forever marked by the extraordinary courage she had displayed in court. Rex remained by her side, a constant guardian and friend. For the townspeople, the story of the trial became something of a legend. They spoke quietly of the child and her dog, marveling at how a whisper, guided by innocence and confirmed by instinct, had altered the course of justice. Even without knowing the specific words, the impact was clear. Courage can manifest in the smallest of packages, and truth can emerge in the most unexpected ways. Emily's parents expressed gratitude to the court, the legal team, and Officer Dalton, but most of all, they credited their daughter's bravery. She faced a situation no child should ever face, her mother said quietly. And she did it with courage, guided by something greater than herself. Dalton nodded in agreement, his gaze shifting to Rex, whose calm demeanor had never faltered. "He's the best partner anyone could have," he added, acknowledging the dog's quiet role in the unfolding of events. The courthouse, once a Site of tension and fear, now symbolized justice achieved through unconventional yet undeniable means. The trial's resolution demonstrated the careful balance between protecting the vulnerable, utilizing unique resources, and pursuing the truth. With precision, Emily and Rex became silent heroes, their contribution hidden from public record, but known to those who orchestrated the investigation. Years later, the story would be recounted in hushed tones, remembered as a moment when a child's courage and a dog's instincts converged to deliver justice. The trial itself became a benchmark in the town's history, a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the extraordinary potential that can arise from the most unlikely partnerships. In the quiet aftermath, Emily and Rex continued their daily routines, unremarkable to outsiders, but heroic in context. The little girl still hugged her teddy bear, still walked to school with tentative steps, still whispered secrets to a dog who would always understand. And in doing so, she carried with her the knowledge that courage, no matter how small, could create ripples that reached far beyond its origin, shaping justice, protecting the innocent, and leaving an indelible mark on an entire community. Fairview, once gripped by fear, had witnessed an extraordinary convergence of innocence, instinct, and law. The verdict had been delivered. Justice, guided by a child's courage and a dog's unwavering instinct, had been served. And the town would never forget the day when two unlikely heroes, a little girl and a German shepherd, ensured that truth triumphed, quietly, without fanfare, yet with undeniable power.